Kody Brown has cried on camera describing a reunion with his children. Real tears, genuine emotion. He has painted this picture, all of them in one room. The family restored, the legacy intact, with the kind of detail that only comes from a dream you have visited many times. And here's what nobody has actually sat down and calculated: what that reunion would specifically require. Not in theory, not in the language of hope, in the concrete, documented behavioral terms of what Kody Brown has actually demonstrated he is willing to do for one specific child. The youngest one. The one who saw everything. The one whose face tells you the truth before her words do. Once you run that calculation, the reunion does not look like a dream anymore. It looks like a math problem with a missing variable, and the variable has a name. If this is your first time on this channel, right now is the moment to hit subscribe, because what we do here is go deeper than the recap and slower than the hot take. This is the analysis that the SisterWives story actually deserves. Now let's get into it. To understand why the reunion Kody Brown describes is currently impossible, you have to go back before the collapse. You have to go back to the seasons of SisterWives where the gathering was real, not managed, not performed, not carefully framed for a camera that needed something heartwarming. There were seasons where the Brown family filled a room and the fullness was genuine, chaotic and loud and occasionally dysfunctional in the way that large families always are, but real in a way that the later seasons never quite recovered. 4 households, dozens of children, a structure that was unusual by design, but that, in its best moments, produced something that looked unmistakably like abundance. Truly, Brown was born into the very end of that era. She was a toddler during the seasons when the gathering still worked, and this is where her story becomes specifically complicated in a way that does not get enough examination. She was old enough to absorb it, young enough that she cannot fully retrieve it. She does not have clean memories of what the family felt like when it functioned. She has something harder to name than memory. She has a felt sense, a body-level knowledge that something once existed that no longer does without the cognitive archive that would let her point to it and say, "This is specifically what I lost." That is a particular and under-examined grief. It is different from Paedon's grief, which is built from memories he can articulate. It is different from Leon's, which is grounded in a long-documented history. Truly's loss is felt rather than remembered, and felt losses are among the most persistent because they do not respond to the same interventions as cognitive ones. Now, here's where the structural problem of the reunion becomes clear. For Kody Brown's imagined gathering to actually occur, it would need the simultaneous willingness of children who have, with remarkable consistency, organized their healing around creating distance from their father. Think about the individual trajectories Paedon's direct public statements, Leon's carefully drawn boundaries, Aspyn's quiet and steady withdrawal, and then Truly, the youngest, developing her own form of self-protective distance that has become more visible in recent years. These are not random individual choices that could be reversed by a single invitation or a well-timed gesture. They are something closer to a collective verdict, arrived at independently, but pointing in the same direction from children who paid very careful attention to what their father's presence and absence actually cost them over a long period of time. Verdicts built on evidence do not reverse because someone dreams of a different outcome. They reverse when the evidence changes. And the evidence, in 2026, has not changed in the ways that would matter. This is the point where Kody Brown's public behavior becomes most worth examining, because here's what he has done repeatedly. Across multiple interviews and media appearances, he has described his hope for family restoration in language that sounds like love and functions like something else entirely. The framing is always passive. I hope someday we can be together again. I dream of a day when my children and I find our way back to each other. I want nothing more than to see my whole family. Listen to that framing carefully. Every one of those sentences places the agency of repair in the space between him and his children equally, as if the distance were a weather event that happened to all of them, rather than a series of specific choices made by a specific person that produced specific, traceable consequences. There is a version of missing your children that costs you nothing. You simply feel the absence, describe it publicly, and receive sympathy for the loss. People see a father in pain and they extend grace because parental grief is legible and moving. And then there is a version of missing your children that costs you everything, where you name, specifically and without softening, the choices you made that created the distance, where you go to each child individually and say, "Here is what I did. Here is how I understand its impact on you specifically. Here is what I'm doing differently." That version is not performed in interviews. It is not described with tears in your eyes for a camera. It happens in private, in the specific relationship, in the sustained and unromantic daily work of rebuilding trust from its actual foundation. Kody Brown has been publicly practicing the first version. The second version, the only one that could actually produce the reunion he describes, remains, as of this video, undemonstrated. And the audience watching has noticed. The SisterWives audience is not a passive consumer of content. They have been watching this family for over a decade across hundreds of hours of footage. They have developed the kind of pattern recognition that comes from sustained, close attention to human behavior. They can see the difference between a man doing the work and a man describing the dream of doing the work. And what they have been seeing consistently is the description. Now we need to talk about Truly's specific position in all of this, because it is more significant than it first appears, and it has not been analyzed with the precision it deserves. In family systems, working the therapeutic framework that looks at families as interconnected systems rather than collections of individuals, there is a consistent and well-documented pattern involving the youngest child's relationship to family estrangement. When the youngest child in a system has developed protective distance from a parent, it represents something specific. The youngest has the most recent relationship data. They have the least complicated legacy loyalty, meaning they have fewer good early memories to balance against more recent difficult ones. Fewer years of the relationship working well to create cognitive dissonance about its later failure. The youngest child's assessment of whether the fundamental dynamic has changed is therefore the most current and the least distorted by historical loyalty. When the youngest remains distant after older siblings have attempted various forms of engagement, some reconciliation, some managed contact, some negotiated proximity, it almost always signals to practitioners that the core condition that created the distance in the first place has not shifted enough to register as genuinely safe at the most current level of the family system. Truly Brown is that youngest child, and if her protective distance is maintained, which the available evidence suggests it currently is, it is not stubbornness, and it is not performance, and it is not the result of outside influence, despite what some corners of the internet have repeatedly suggested without evidence. It is data. It is the family system's most current and least compromised assessment of whether genuine change has occurred. It is, in the most precise sense available, the truth. And this is where the reunion's specific impossibility becomes most clear. Kody Brown has described wanting all of his children present in his imagined gathering, but Truly's presence in that gathering would require something very specific from him. Not a general expression of love, not a public declaration of wanting her back, not an emotional interview where he describes how much he misses her. It would require the individual, sustained, unperformed work of rebuilding a specific relationship with a specific child who has specific memories of specific moments where she looked for her father and found something else in his place. That work is not dramatic. It does not make good television. It does not produce quotable moments for recap channels. It is quiet and slow. And it requires showing up in the same way, repeatedly, over time, without the external validation of a camera recording it, or an audience responding to it. It requires Kody Brown to be specifically present for Truly Brown in a context that offers him nothing in return except the relationship itself. Whether he is doing that work in private, away from cameras, in the specific relationship with his youngest daughter, is genuinely unknown. It is the one thing that cannot be assessed from the outside. But what can be assessed from the outside is the public behavior. And the public behavior, as recently as his last documented interviews, is still passive framing. Still the dreaming language. Still, the reunion is described as a hope rather than a project. Still, the distance presented as something that happened to the family rather than something that was built, choice by choice, over years. Here is the prediction, and I want you to remember this one specifically. Within the next 2 to 3 years, there will be a documented Brown family gathering of some kind. It will be captured in some format. It might be a social media post, a special episode, an interview where someone describes it after the fact. When that gathering occurs, the SisterWives community, the audience, the recap channels, the long-term viewers who have been paying attention since the beginning will ask one question before any other. Was Truly there? Her attendance will be the headline, Her absence will be the story, and if she is present, her face will be examined with the kind of precision that only comes from years of watching someone closely enough to know the difference between their genuine warmth and their carefully managed comfort. Because truly Brown cannot perform safety, she does not feel. She never learned to. She is, in this specific way, the Brown family's most reliable narrator. Not because she speaks the most, but because what shows on her face when she is not choosing her expression is worth more than any statement any member of this family has made in an interview. The reunion Kody Brown dreams of is not impossible because his children are unwilling. It is not impossible because the wounds are too deep to ever heal. It is not impossible because the family is permanently broken in ways that cannot be addressed. It is currently impossible because the specific work that would make it possible has not been demonstrated in the specific relationship with the specific child whose presence would make it real. That is where we are. And in part 2, we go into the layers underneath this that most people have not yet examined. The betrayal that happens every time the reunion is described publicly, without the accountability that would make it meaningful. The audience's extraordinary ability to distinguish genuine from performed. And the question that this community right here, the people watching this video, are uniquely positioned to answer. The second part is starting now. Let's talk about what actually happens every time Kody Brown describes his reunion dream in a public forum. Because there is something happening in those moments that sounds like one thing and functions as something else entirely. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. When a parent who has created distance from their children describes publicly how much they hope for restoration, the framing of that description matters enormously. It matters because framing is not decoration. Framing is an argument. Framing tells you who the speaker believes is responsible for the current situation, who holds the agency to change it, and what the speaker believes is required for things to be different. And Kody Brown's framing, across every interview and every emotional on-camera moment where he has described wanting his family back, has been consistent in a way that should be examined rather than accepted at face value. The framing is always, always distributed. I hope we find our way back to each other. I dream of a day when the family comes together again. I want nothing more than for my children to be part of my life. Notice what those sentences have in common? The agency is spread across the whole family equally. The distance is presented as a shared condition rather than a traced consequence. The children who are on the other side of a river that was built from specific choices are implicitly positioned as co-holders of the key to crossing it. This is not a neutral language. This is, whether consciously or not, a form of responsibility redistribution, and it is a particularly painful one for the children receiving it because it takes the specific, documentable, traceable story of how the distance was created and softens it into a mutual drifting, a natural dispersal, a shared situation that all parties are equally empowered to resolve. Truly, Brown did not build the distance. She responded to it. She did not create the conditions that made protective withdrawal feel necessary. She assessed those conditions with the accuracy that children always bring to the question of whether a parent is truly present, and she responded accordingly. She is standing on the far side of a river she did not dig, and every time Kody Brown publicly describes hoping the family finds its way back together, he is, perhaps without meaning to, perhaps with complete unawareness of the dynamic, asking the people standing on the far bank to build the bridge. That is the betrayal that lives inside the reunion dream. Not a dramatic betrayal, not a malicious one, but a consistent, documented, structurally embedded one where the person who holds the greatest responsibility for the repair continues to frame the situation in language that distributes that responsibility outward. And where the youngest child, who has the most current and least distorted read on the situation, continues to receive that framing from the outside world as evidence that she is one of many parties who could choose differently, rather than someone whose protective distance is a rational and earned response to specific, real, documented experiences. Now, let's talk about what this audience sees. Because the SisterWives fandom is not a group of casual observers who respond emotionally to surface content and move on. You are, and I mean this with complete seriousness, among the most sophisticated audience that any reality television franchise has ever produced. You have been watching this family for over a decade. You have access to footage stretching back to the very beginning of the Brown family's public life. You have collectively developed a capacity for pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, and longitudinal comparison that most professional commentators do not possess, because most professional commentators have not put in the hours. You have. And what this audience has demonstrated repeatedly across years of commentary and analysis and community discussion is the ability to make one specific distinction with extraordinary accuracy: the distinction between what is genuine and what is produced. You can tell when a Brown family moment is real, and you can tell when it is managed. You have developed this ability not from cynicism, but from sustained, careful attention to the difference between how these people behave when something is true and how they behave when something is being constructed for consumption. This matters enormously for the reunion question, because if a Brown family gathering ever airs in any format, on any platform, in any configuration, this audience will not respond to the surface. You will go immediately to the data points you trust. And the data point you trust most, for reasons that have been earned over years of watching her, is truly Brown's face. You have been reading her for a long time. You know what ease looks like on her. You know what managed comfort looks like. You know the difference between her genuine engagement with a sibling and her careful, contained presence in a situation she is navigating rather than inhabiting. You have that knowledge because she has never learned to hide the difference, and possibly because she has never tried to. And possibly because at her age, with her specific temperament, the performance of ease in situations that are not easy is not yet a skill she has developed or chosen to develop. Either way, the result is the same. Truly Brown, in any documented gathering context, will tell the truth with her body before she opens her mouth. And this audience will read it. Immediately, accurately, and without mercy for any narrative that tries to paper over what her expression is actually communicating. That is why the reunion, if it is ever attempted for cameras before the genuine work has been done, will be the most expensive mistake the franchise could make, because the audience will see it. And the audience talking about what they saw, in comments, in recaps, in community spaces, will be more influential than any produced narrative placed around the footage. You have taken the story of this family out of the production company's hands in ways that the production company has never fully reckoned with. The audience is now the primary narrator, and the audience's primary source of truth is Truly's face. Let's go one layer deeper. There is a family systems principle at work here that explains why the reunion problem is not just emotional, but structural, meaning it is not something that changes because feelings change, but because behaviors change in specific ways over sufficient time to register as trustworthy. Trust, in family systems terms, is not rebuilt through declarations. It is rebuilt through what researchers call behavioral confirmation, the repeated, consistent demonstration of new patterns over time in the specific relationship in response to the specific conditions that broke the trust in the first place. This means that for Truly to feel genuinely safe in a room with Kody Brown, not managed safe, not negotiated safe, but the kind of safe that produces the expression this audience would recognize as real, he would need to have demonstrated over time in their specific relationship that the specific conditions that produced her protective distance no longer exist. He would need to have shown up for her in the ways he failed to show up during the years the family was fracturing. Not in general, specifically, in the moments that were hers, her milestones, her ordinary days, her needs that did not compete with anyone else's for his attention. He would need to have done this consistently, without cameras, without an audience, without the external validation that has historically motivated so much of his visible engagement with family life. He would need to have done it long enough that Truly's nervous system, which has its own memory, separate from her cognitive one, registered the change as real rather than performed. That is a long project. It is not a conversation. It is not a single accountability moment that gets documented and referenced in subsequent interviews. It is years of showing up in a specific way for a specific person with no guarantee of return and no audience to affirm the effort. And whether Kody Brown is engaged in that project right now privately, away from cameras, in the actual relationship with his youngest daughter, is genuinely unknown from the outside. But here is what is known: his public behavior. The interviews, the framing, the reunion dream described with tears and passive language, does not suggest a man who has completed or even substantially progressed through that project, because men who are doing that work in private do not typically simultaneously perform the longing publicly in ways that implicitly position their children as co-responsible for the distance. Those two things are in tension with each other. The private work of specific accountability and the public performance of generalized longing point in opposite directions. One says, I know what I did, I know what it cost you specifically, and I'm doing the specific work of addressing it with you in private. The other says, I miss my family, and I hope we find our way back. You cannot be genuinely doing the first while consistently producing the second. The cognitive dissonance of that position would be unsustainable over time. Now, here's what I actually believe, and I want to be precise about this, because this is not about condemning Kody Brown as a person, and it never has been. What I believe is that Kody Brown loves the idea of his family in a way that is genuine, and that genuinely causes him pain. I believe the tears are real. I believe the dream is real. What I do not believe, based on the documented, observable evidence available, is that he has connected the dream to its specific, unglamorous, unperformed prerequisites. I think there is a gap between his emotional experience of loss and his cognitive understanding of what created it. And I think that gap is the exact space where the reunion dies every time it gets close to being possible. Because here is the hardest truth in this entire topic. And stay with me here, because this is the piece that most analysis misses. The reunion Kody Brown wants is not just logistically complicated. It is psychologically threatening in a specific way that may be genuinely invisible to him, because a real reunion is the kind where everyone in the room is there because they want to be, not because it was negotiated or produced or motivated by something external that requires him to be in a room with people who know exactly what happened. Who watched it? Who paid the specific costs of his specific choices? And who, if the reunion is genuine rather than managed, will bring that knowledge into the room with them? A genuine reunion is not a fresh start. It is a reunion, a re-meeting of people who carry a shared history that includes things that were not good. The warmth of it, if it is real, does not erase that history. It coexists with it. And for Kody Brown, sitting in a room with truly Brown in a context that is genuine rather than managed means sitting with a person who has an accurate, unsentimentalized, uncompromised record of what the experience of being his child during the fracture years actually cost her. That is an uncomfortable thing to be present with. And there are people who will spend enormous energy, conscious or not, avoiding that specific discomfort by keeping the reunion in the safer space of the dream, where it can be described with tears and never tested by the reality of the room. I am not saying that is what Kody Brown is doing. I am saying that it is a pattern worth naming, because it is a pattern that explains a great deal of behavior that otherwise looks contradictory. It explains why someone can simultaneously claim to want something and consistently fail to take the specific steps that would produce it. The dream of the reunion and the work of the reunion are not the same thing. And sometimes the dream is what prevents the work, because as long as the reunion exists as a beautiful, imagined future, it does not have to become a difficult, uncertain, accountable present. Truly, Brown, in all of this, is not a variable to be managed. She is not an obstacle to be overcome. She is not the hard case that complicates the otherwise achievable reunion. She is the most honest signal in the system. The person whose response to whatever Kody Brown has or has not done in the real relationship will be the most accurate available measure of whether something genuine has changed. And I will say again what I said in part 1, because it bears repeating with the full weight of everything we have examined together. Her presence in any future gathering will be the headline. Her face will be the story, and whatever her face says in that moment, genuine warmth, careful management, real comfort, performed ease, will be worth more than every word spoken in every interview Kody Brown has ever given about what kind of father he is and what kind of family he wants. Watch for it. Remember this video when it comes, and ask yourself at that moment whether what you are seeing is the reunion or the performance of the reunion. Because this audience, you specifically, will know the difference. You always do. Here is what I want from you right now in the comments below this video. I want you to answer one question, and I want you to be specific rather than general, because general answers are easy, and specific ones are where the real thinking happens. Do you believe a genuine Brown family reunion is possible? Not a camera reunion, not a PR event, Not a gathering that gets posted to social media with a carefully selected photograph and a caption about gratitude and growth. A genuine one, where every person in the room is there because they chose to be, without negotiation, without external motivation, and where what shows on Truly Brown's face is the unmanaged expression of someone who feels actually safe. Yes or no? And tell me why, with the specific evidence you are drawing on, because your answer and your reasoning together are worth more than any pundit's take. This audience's collective answer to that question is the most informed one available anywhere on the internet. I mean that without any exaggeration. If you are new here, and some of you are because this series has been bringing in people who have never seen this channel before, this is what we do. We do not recap. We do not react. We analyze. We go deep. We follow the evidence where it leads. And we trust this community to engage with the analysis seriously. If that is the kind of space you want to be in, subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell, because the next topic in this series is the one I have been building toward across all 25 of these. And I have told you before that it is the darkest and most carefully researched one in the entire project. I was not being dramatic when I said that. Everything in this series has been leading to topic 26. The work that went into it is unlike anything I have produced before. Topic 25 is done. Truly Brown's story within the Brown family is not. It is still being written in real time. In private, in the specific relationship between a youngest child and the father she is still, at some level, waiting to see show up. In the specific way she has always needed. Whether that showing up happens, or whether it is already happening in ways we cannot see from the outside, is the question this family will answer in time. The audience will know. When the moment comes, the audience will know, because the audience has always known. That has been, from the very beginning of this franchise, the thing that SisterWives got most right by accident. It gave you enough footage and enough time with these people that you developed a genuine relationship with the truth of who they are. And that relationship does not lie. It does not accept managed narratives at face value. It reads faces and body language, and the specific quality of silence in a room where something is being carefully not said. Take that with you. Come back for topic 26. And until then, stay curious, stay specific, and keep watching closely, because the story is not over.